No man will ever be truly free until he fully commands himself. Epictetus discourses. What if everything you've been taught about love was never meant to make you free, but to keep you obedient? There was a time, maybe not long ago, when you believed that being a good man meant giving everything your time, your energy, your affection, even your silence. You were told that love requires sacrifice. So you gave, and gave, and gave, until one day you looked in the mirror and couldn't recognize the man staring back. The strong voice you once had was now a whisper. Your boundaries blurred into apologies. And the worst part, you called that devotion. But what if it wasn't? 2,000 years ago, a former slave named Epictetus warned men like you. He didn't speak of romance, he spoke of freedom. He saw clearly what modern men often forget, that a man who trades his peace of mind for approval, no matter how beautiful the giver, has already surrendered the only thing that truly belongs to him. And this is where your story begins. What if the chains that bind modern men aren't made of iron, but of approval, silence, and the fear of disconnection? Epictetus, born into slavery and later revered as a Stoic philosopher, understood something that most men still haven't realized. Freedom isn't granted by society, relationships, or external status. It is seized through the mastery of one's own mind. He once asked, "If a man gave your body to a stranger, you would be outraged. But if you hand over your mind to anyone who comes along, have you no shame in that?" We live in a time where men appear free. They work, they date, they speak their minds, but inwardly they're shackled. Shackled by the desperate need to be liked. Shackled by the emotional highs and lows of someone else's moods. Shackled by a quiet terror. What if she leaves? What if I'm alone? What if I'm not enough? And so in the name of love or peace, they silence themselves. They lower their gaze, ignore their gut, and walk on eggshells in hopes that emotional obedience will earn them affection. But here's the truth. Epictetus knew if your peace can be taken by another person's emotions, it was never yours to begin with. A man who has not mastered himself will always be mastered by someone else. It may not come with a whip or a collar, but the leash is there in every hesitant yes, when he means no, in every withheld opinion, in every night he loses sleep replaying what he should have said. Self-mastery isn't coldness, it's clarity. It doesn't mean avoiding love, it means not being ruled by it. Because the moment you make someone else the center of your emotional world, you surrender the throne of your own soul. And no man is free who is not master of himself. There's a moment every man feels it. Quiet, invisible, but searing. It's that split second when he laughs at a joke. He doesn't find funny nods at a demand that slices against his values, or says, "I'm sorry," not because he believes he was wrong, but because he's afraid she might walk away. That moment is not love. That moment is betrayal, the kind that doesn't happen between lovers, but deep within the man himself. Epictetus warned us long before modern romance existed, when you hand your peace over to someone else, you're not in love, you are enslaved. Yet men today confuse attachment with virtue. They've been conditioned to believe that tolerating emotional chaos, sacrificing their truth, or absorbing disrespect in silence is somehow noble. But nothing could be further from Stoic wisdom, because the man who bends not from conviction, but from fear of disconnection, has already abandoned the very core of his being. And what makes it tragic is that he does it in the name of love. But love without boundaries is not love. It is a slow death. It's waking up in the morning with a tightness in your chest you can't explain. It's becoming less of yourself in the hope that someone else might stay. It's calling it loyalty when it's really just fear wearing a mask. Epictetus didn't write for the emotionally detached, he wrote for the emotionally disciplined. He didn't teach men to avoid affection, but to never build their identity upon it. You do not owe your happiness to any woman. Not because she doesn't matter, but because your soul is not hers to govern. Your peace is your own. Your joy is your responsibility. Your stability must never hinge on her validation, because the moment it does, you've already lost the most sacred thing you possess, not the relationship, not the woman, but yourself. There's a disturbing lie that many men have swallowed without ever questioning it, that chaos is romantic, that emotional instability is a sign of passion, and that love means enduring everything, even when it dishonors you. Somewhere along the line, pain became proof of devotion, and so men tolerate it. The shouting, the cold shoulders, the emotional manipulation. They stay in relationships that rob them of peace, but convince themselves it's just a phase, just a test, just part of loving deeply. But Epictetus would call this delusion by its true name, spiritual self-destruction. The Stoic path isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about mastering them. It's about knowing the difference between intensity and intimacy, between desire and duty. Yet far too many men confuse being emotionally stirred with being emotionally fulfilled. They interpret her mood swings as depth, her volatility as fire, her withdrawal as mystery. But what they're actually clinging to is drama dressed up as love. And in doing so, they dishonor themselves. They think they're being patient, loving, noble. But in truth, they're betraying their own clarity, living in a storm they call connection. They wake up exhausted, constantly questioning themselves, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering the next argument. And when the chaos settles briefly, they call that peace. But it's not peace. It's the quiet moment in a battlefield between bombings. Epictetus said, "It's not events that disturb us, but our judgment about them." The woman yelling at you isn't the problem. Your belief that yelling equals love is. The silent treatment isn't cruelty, it's your interpretation of silence as punishment that gives it power. You suffer not because she's chaotic, but because you believe you must endure chaos to be worthy of her. You are not a receptacle for emotional madness. You're not her therapist, her punching bag, or her project. And if you've convinced yourself that survival in dysfunction is masculinity, then you haven't understood love or yourself. True love will never ask you to bleed to prove your loyalty. Chaos is not chemistry. And respect will never grow where dignity is constantly sacrificed. There is no tragedy more subtle and more common than a man who slowly erodes his own integrity in the name of keeping a woman. It never happens all at once. It starts small, a disagreement, swallowed a boundary, softened a value compromise just this once. But soon, that man no longer walks with conviction. He tiptoes. He censors himself. He doesn't speak with clarity, he speaks to please. And what's worse, he calls that love. But Epictetus, a man who spoke not from comfort, but from chains, would tell you otherwise. To trade your principles for affection is to commit philosophical suicide. You don't just lose the relationship, you lose your internal compass. And when a man loses that, he becomes hollow, directionless. He might still smile, still perform, still buy roses, but he knows deep down he has been unmade. So many men confuse this collapse with emotional maturity. They say, "I'm learning to compromise." But there's a difference between healthy compromise and spiritual abandonment. One builds unity, the other buries identity. The former is a bridge between two strong individuals. The latter is a graveyard where your authenticity goes to die. Epictetus reminds us, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. But how many men forget what they once said? They once swore they'd never tolerate disrespect. They once promised they'd never beg for love. And yet here they are apologizing for things they didn't do, shrinking for someone who doesn't even value the space they once took up with pride. Love does not demand that you betray yourself. Real partnership is not built on compliance, but on mutual recognition of truth. If she only stays, because you've silenced your voice and swallowed your dignity, then what you've built isn't a relationship, it's a performance. And every performance has an expiration date, because the man who chases her at the cost of himself doesn't win her. He just slowly disappears. And no woman worth keeping ever fell in love with a ghost. There's a dangerous lie circulating through modern relationships that a man must regulate not only his own emotions, but hers as well. That he must decode her silence, stabilize her storms, absorb her moods like emotional armor. And if he fails, the blame is his. He wasn't attentive enough, gentle enough, understanding enough. But what if Epictetus was right? What if none of that was ever his to carry? Epictetus taught that freedom begins by recognizing the simple truth. Some things are up to us and some are not. Her reactions, her emotions, her loyalty, these are not in your control. And if they're not in your control, then they cannot be your responsibility. Yet countless men wake up every day and build their worth on this shifting ground, this fragile hope that if they do everything just right, she will remain calm, happy, loyal. But that's not love. That's emotional servitude. It's in the little things. He crafts his text like a diplomat. He reads into her tone like a codebreaker. He second-guesses his jokes, holds back opinions, rehearses conversations like a performer. Not because he's weak, but because he's been conditioned to believe that her emotional state defines the success of the relationship and even his value as a man. But here's the hard truth. If her peace requires the death of your voice, it was never peace. It was power, dressed as love. And the man who confuses submission with devotion will always end up exhausted and unseen. You were not created to orbit her feelings. You are not the sun of someone else's solar system. You are a mountain not to be moved by the winds of emotion, but to stand firm in your values. Epictetus reminds us that it is not events that disturb us, but our judgment about them. So when she withdraws, when she rages, when she tests you, it's not your job to fix it. It's your job to remain grounded. Because the moment you take responsibility for what is not yours, you abandon what is, and that is the first step away from freedom. One of the most subtle forms of male suffering today is the savior complex. The belief that if he just loves harder, waits longer, sacrifices more, she'll finally see him, finally love him, finally change. He sees her chaos as a challenge, her emotional wounds as a mission, and her indifference as an opportunity to prove himself. But what Epictetus would say to this man is simple and cutting. It is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. And what many men think they know is this, that love is earned. That affection is a prize for emotional endurance. That if he plays his part well enough, the story will resolve and she'll become the woman he envisioned all along. But that's not love. That's a slow, quiet decay of self-worth disguised as loyalty. And the man who believes he can fix her is not a hero. He's a hostage to a fantasy. This man doesn't realize he's shrinking. He apologizes for his masculinity. He censors his truth. He bends over backwards to maintain a connection that only survives when he stays small. And he calls that growth. But in reality, he's disappearing. Because no woman who requires you to betray your nature to feel safe is asking for partnership, she's asking for control. Epictetus taught that freedom is found in recognizing what's not yours to manage. Her past is not yours to heal. Her trauma is not your burden. Her moods are not your responsibility. You can offer love, but you cannot earn respect through sacrifice. In fact, the more you try to fix her, the less she respects you. Not because she's cruel, but because you've proven that you don't respect yourself. You are not her therapist. You are not her project. You are a man. And your role is not to prove your worth, it is to live it. Because if love only flows when you abandon your truth, you haven't won her heart, you've rented her attention at the cost of your soul. Modern men have been sold a myth that closure is something another person can give you, that if she would just explain why she left, why she changed, why she loved you then, but not now, you'd finally be able to move on. So you wait. You replay conversations. You craft texts you never send. You hope for one last talk, one last apology, one last chance to understand. But Epictetus would look you in the eyes and say, you don't need closure. You need clarity within yourself. Because the truth is, closure is often just a craving to make sense of pain that feels senseless. But not all pain is meant to be explained. Some is meant to awaken you. Some is meant to burn away the illusion. And the longer you delay that awakening in search of external validation, the longer you stay stuck chained not by her words, but by your refusal to face the silence. You see, the Stoics never waited for others to restore their peace. They reclaimed it from within. They understood that begging for answers is often just a disguised way of asking for permission to let go, to feel okay, to move forward. But no one can grant you that. Not your ex, not your therapist, not even time. Only you can. Epictetus reminds us that what disturbs us is not the event itself, but our judgment of it. She ghosted you. That's a fact. But you're suffering. That comes from the story you've written about what it means I wasn't good enough. I should have done more. I need to know why. That's not truth. That's torment disguised as logic. So stop chasing closure like it's some golden key to peace. Peace isn't found in her explanation. It's found in your detachment. When you stop needing her validation, her remorse, or her clarity, you begin to recover your power. Because the man who learns to live without the apology he never got is a man who walks in true wisdom. And wisdom, unlike closure, never leaves you waiting. We live in a world that tells men to be confident, but only if others approve. To be masculine, but only if it's gentle. To be strong, but only in ways that don't upset anyone. The result? Millions of men walking around looking like leaders on the outside, but inwardly ruled by the shifting emotions of those around them, especially women. But Epictetus offers a different vision of manhood, one that isn't reactive, one that doesn't orbit, one that is still. You were not made to orbit someone else's gravity, he might say. And yet, that's what so many men do. They adjust their tone based on her mood. They question their worth based on her attention. They reshape their schedule, their energy, even their purpose around the hope that she will stay. But that is not leadership. That is not strength. That is emotional dependence wrapped in romantic language. True masculinity isn't loud. It isn't performative. It isn't desperate for acknowledgement. It's autonomous, still, rooted. A man should be like a mountain calm amid storms, unmoved by praise or blame, grounded in principle, not preference. But that kind of man scares people. He isn't easy to manipulate. He doesn't chase. He doesn't beg. He simply lives in truth. And that's why modern society subtly tries to shame him into shrinking into becoming palatable, agreeable, controllable. But Epictetus teaches that freedom is the fruit of self-governance. And that's what masculinity truly is: not domination over others, but mastery over self. Not control of women, but detachment from needing their approval to feel whole. Because the moment you let someone else dictate how you feel, you've handed over your power. And a man who does that, no matter how good his intentions, has forgotten what it means to be sovereign. Autonomy doesn't mean isolation. It means choosing yourself over and over, especially when it's hard. It means standing firm when everyone wants you to fold. And it means walking away from anything that asks you to betray your core for the sake of comfort. Because a man who lives without autonomy doesn't live. He performs. It starts subtly. She raises her voice. She ignores your message for a day. She questions your decisions in front of others. And inside you, something shifts. You feel the pressure to smooth it over, to fix the tension, to prove you're still worthy. But here's what most men never realize. These moments aren't accidents, they're tests. Not always conscious, not always malicious, but instinctive. Women test men not to break them, but to see if they can be broken. Epictetus wouldn't have called it manipulation. He would have called it nature, a test of structure, a test of sovereignty. You see, women don't respect words, they respect the spine behind them. They don't respect promises, they respect presence. And nothing exposes a man's character faster than how he reacts under emotional pressure. Do you fold when she withholds affection? Do you beg when she pulls away? Do you trade your values for a moment of approval? If so, then what you're offering her isn't love, it's emotional servitude dressed up in romance. And once she senses that you fear losing her, she instinctively knows that she owns you. And that is where attraction begins to rot. Because no matter what culture tells you, a woman cannot follow a man who follows her. She cannot submit to a man who submits his truth just to keep her happy. The test is not meant to destroy you, it's meant to reveal you. And what she's subconsciously searching for is this: will you remain the mountain when the storm hits? You see the man who panics in the face of disapproval, who over-explains, who pleads and bargains, teaches her one thing: he does not trust himself. And if he doesn't trust himself, why should she? Epictetus reminds us, when someone provokes you, remember it is your judgment that disturbs you. Hold that judgment, stay still, let her storm pass. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. Because your peace is not negotiable, and your worth is not up for debate. Because the man who cannot be broken wins not just her respect, but his own. Peace. It's what every man says he wants, yet few ever find it because they've been taught to look in the wrong places. They search for it in a woman's arms, in a text message, reply in a relationship status. They believe that peace is something that comes from being loved, when in reality true peace only emerges when a man learns to love without losing himself. And that Epictetus knew is the rarest form of power sovereignty. Sovereignty means you belong fully to yourself, not in arrogance, not in isolation, but in unshakable clarity. It means your emotions do not depend on her smile. Your confidence is not rooted in how she looks at you. Your sense of direction does not rise and fall with her moods. You are centered not because she stays, but because you've chosen to stand. And yet most men have been trained to believe that attachment is love. That devotion means enduring emotional chaos. That patience means tolerating disrespect. So they hold on long after the relationship has gone hollow. They tell themselves they're being loyal when in truth they're afraid. Afraid of being alone. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of meeting their own eyes in the mirror without her presence to validate them. But Epictetus would say, better to die of hunger exempt from grief and fear than to live in affluence with perturbation. In other words, better to be alone in truth than partnered in confusion. Better to sit in silence than beg for attention. Better to protect your peace than barter it for temporary affection. Because a woman can leave, she can change, she can betray you. But your inner stillness that belongs only to you, it cannot be stolen, only surrendered. And when you surrender it, not even love can save you. Real peace isn't found in being chosen. It's found in the quiet strength of choosing yourself, especially when the world and your heart are begging you not to. There comes a point in every man's life when he must face the mirror, not the one hanging on the wall, but the one inside his soul. And when he looks into it honestly, he will see the truth that for most of his life, he has been performing for love, smiling when he's hurting, agreeing when he's in conflict, giving even when it empties him, and all of it not for virtue, but for validation. But the truth Epictetus offers is as liberating as it is uncomfortable. You were not born to be loved. You were born to be whole. Modern culture tells men they are worthy if they are wanted, if they are chosen, if they are seen. But masculinity cannot thrive in conditional acceptance. It withers there. Because the man who lives for love will abandon himself to keep it. He'll soften his voice. He'll reshape his spine. He'll water down his mission just to remain tolerable. And in doing so, he won't be loved, he'll be tolerated. There's a high cost to needing love more than you need clarity. It makes you blind to red flags. It makes you tolerate behavior you once said you'd never accept. It turns you into a mirror reflecting what she wants to see instead of standing as who you truly are. But Epictetus didn't teach men to seek affection. He taught them to seek wisdom. And wisdom demands one brutal but necessary act to let go of the need to be loved. Because only when you release that need do you reclaim your power. Only then can you walk away without resentment. Only then can you lead without apology. Only then can you stand in a room unseen, misunderstood, even unloved, and still feel completely alive. A man who doesn't need love is not cold, he is clear. And from that clarity comes a deeper kind of connection, one not built on performance but on presence. Not on desperation, but on sovereignty. You cannot love freely until you no longer need it to complete you. And when that happens, love becomes a gift, not a crutch. A reflection, not a requirement. There is a quiet revolution that begins the moment a man truly decides to choose himself. Not in arrogance, not in bitterness, but in reverence for his own soul. He no longer waits to be picked. He no longer begs to be seen. He no longer performs for the fleeting praise of someone who only values the mask he wears. Instead, he takes off that mask, and what's left is raw, real, and immovable. That man becomes untouchable. Not untouchable in the sense that nothing hurts him, but in the sense that nothing controls him. You can't bribe him with beauty. You can't guilt him with silence. You can't seduce him with drama. Because he's not addicted to affection, he's anchored in alignment. He has become the mountain that Epictetus spoke of. The one who stands in storms not because he enjoys the wind, but because his roots go deep enough to endure it. And that kind of man, he terrifies the world. Because the world has been built on emotional transaction, on neediness disguised as love, on obedience disguised as devotion. But this man, this sovereign man, does not negotiate with disrespect. He doesn't tolerate manipulation. He doesn't shrink to keep the peace. Because his peace is not up for negotiation. It is guarded like sacred ground. And if someone cannot honor that ground, they are not permitted to stand on it. This man has walked through fire not to burn, but to purify. He has let go of every version of himself that needed applause to feel worthy. He has buried the beggar, mourned the mask, and risen as something new, something whole. And what he's learned is this: the man who chooses himself even when it costs him connection, even when it leaves him alone, loses nothing that was ever meant to stay. Because he no longer builds his identity on being wanted. He builds it on being true. And there is no greater strength than that. In a world that constantly demands your attention, approval, and emotional availability, the most radical act a man can commit is to choose himself without apology. The message is simple but profound. Your peace is not earned through validation. It is reclaimed through clarity. You do not need to prove your worth to anyone. You don't need to be loved to be valuable. And you certainly don't need to betray yourself to maintain a connection that costs your dignity. The real strength isn't in how much you can endure from someone else. It's in how firmly you can stand in your truth, even when it means standing alone. As Epictetus taught, freedom begins when you stop trying to control what isn't yours and take full ownership of what is your thoughts, your reactions, your mission. So let this be your reminder: love deeply, but never lose yourself in the process. Because the man who honors his own soul is not just free, he's unbreakable.